Welcome to the Great Loop Radio podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Russo. I'm the director of AGLCA. Today we're going to talk about our aging lock system with a special focus on the Wilson lock on the Tennessee River, which is a pressure point right now. So we'll jump into that in just a moment, but I do want to take a moment, as always, to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Great Loop Yacht Sales, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And with that out of the way, I'd like to officially welcome our guest today. He is Cline Jones, the Executive Director of the Tennessee River Valley Association and the Tennessee-Cumberland Waterways Council. So Cline, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate that you reached out to me just before our fall rendezvous to provide some information and details on the Wilson Lock. We're going to talk about the Wilson Lock, of course, today and expand the discussion a little bit beyond that. But for those listeners who aren't sure where the Wilson Lock is, let's kind of start there, Cline, if you tell us the location of Wilson Lock.
It's in just about the middle of the river at Florence, Alabama. Wilson Dam was the first dam on the Tennessee River, built in between 1917 and 1925. The first lock and dam structure built on the Tennessee there, just about the middle of the Tennessee River in Florence, Alabama.
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't on the Great Loop route yet or haven't studied the Tennessee River part of it, the Wilson Lock is not mandatory for the Great Loop. It's kind of on the part of the Tennessee River that is a side trip. But the Wilson Lock does stand between the main part of the route and the site of our fall rendezvous. So it was a big concern for the loopers headed by boat to the fall rendezvous. And that's why Cline reached out to me to try. We knew there was an issue going on there. We were working our best to work our way through it. But Cline was kind enough to provide some additional details. So to kind of start off, Cline, let's do a little bit of a better introduction of you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know you yourself are a boater, so give us some of those details.
Well, I'm getting old. I'm about to turn 65 years old, along with Wilson Lock and Dam. Was born and raised about a mile from the Tennessee River there in Florence, Alabama. I've spent all my life in, on, and around the Tennessee River. Growing up, my dad was a skier, so we always had a runabout. When I was in high school and through college, I had a good friend of my dad's who had a beautiful 36-foot Chris Craft traditional cabin cruiser that on the weekends I helped to keep clean and maintain, and as a result, got to spend some time on the river. When I got out of school, got a job and could afford a boat, my wife and I purchased, I guess about 1987, we purchased a Trojan 26 traditional cabin cruiser, a bit smaller than the boat that I had worked and maintained on. But we kept it at Joe Wheeler State Park for a number of years and spent a lot of time on Wilson Lake. Those of you who may not be familiar, the distance between Wilson and Wheeler is 14 miles. The river dropped about 100 feet in those 14 miles. So it's a beautiful deep water lake that you can't get in trouble, mostly residential. So it was a great place to grow up, a great place to have a boat, and a great place to raise our child, our daughter. I guess about 5 years ago, when our daughter got to be of an age where it wasn't cool to go hang out with daddy all weekend, my wife had family was having health issues. I found that the boat just wasn't getting used. So we sold it, but boy, I miss it, and I've actually been talking to the owner now about possibly buying that boat back. It's still at Wheeler, and it's something that's really interesting to me.
Yeah,
love the river.
And the Tennessee River is spectacular, and that's one of the reasons it is a very popular side trip for the Great Loop. So beyond those who were attending the fall rendezvous, some loopers are just taking that side trip up towards Chattanooga, or even all the way up to Knoxville or the end of navigation on the Little Tennessee River. So we did it last summer, really enjoyed it. But as I mentioned, the Wilson Lock is kind of a pressure point on the system right now. And it's not the only one in the US's system of locks and dams that make these waterways navigable. But Wilson is kind of the current problem child, so to speak. So going back a few years, because issues did start there a few years ago, kind of tell us what has happened and what the current status is.
Well, 3 years ago, the end of August, I guess that would have been 3 years ago, would have been 21. remnants of Hurricane Ida blew across North Alabama. There had been some maintenance being done on the floating upstream guide wall, about 100 feet of water, a floating guide wall that the barges would come into and align on before coming into the lock, or a pleasure boater would pull up on. If they didn't have the radio, could pull the rope in the ladder, and the horn would go off, and the lock operator would know they were there and locked them down. The remnants of Hurricane Ida blew across there, broke that 62-year-old structure at the time away from the structure of the dam, and it sank there and is sitting on the bottom. Because the Tennessee Valley Authority owns the locks and dams on the Tennessee River, and under memorandum of agreement with the Corps of Engineers, the Army Corps of Engineers maintains and operates only the locks. There was some discrepancy about whose authority it was or who should come up with the money to repair that. So 3 years later, we are still having that argument. There is language in the Senate version of the Water Resources Development Act for 2024 that's currently in committee, in joint committee, being discussed between the House and the Senate, that we hope to authorize the construction of the new guide wall there. Fast forward 3 years, September the 25th, just before you guys started coming to town. First of all, the Wilson main chamber that was built in 1959 is 65 years old now, is the largest single stage lift east of the Rockies. Only the John Day out on the Snake Columbia system is higher by just a few feet. So they have these enormous 110-foot lower gates, 110 feet tall, 1.3 million pounds per leaf. As they were filling and emptying the chamber on or about September the 25th, they started hearing some cracking and popping, and they knew that that meant there was something wrong with the gates. So they immediately stopped any locking up procedures, closed the lock. Divers went into the water and found cracks on the lowermost part of the gates, right at where the load-bearing portion of the gate meets the lock walls. So they closed it down, identified cracks in the gates, cracks in the pintle, which, if you can think of your shoulder or your hip, think of it as your hip. There's basically a ball that the weight of that gate sits on and is attached at the top and swings and pivots on that ball. That is the pintle. There were also cracks found in the pintle, which means they're going to have to hopefully be able to weld those cracks, probably going to have to replace them. In fact, the plans are now to replace the pintles. So that's the issue. We're closed there. So we are relying on the auxiliary lock, which was the one I mentioned earlier that was built in 1925. It is a smaller, much smaller two-stage system that's only 60 feet wide by 300 feet long, two chambers, that is only able to accommodate one barge at a time, is unable to accommodate the rocket ship that carries United Launch Alliance rockets out of Decatur, Alabama, down the river system, out into the Gulf of Mexico to either Cape Canaveral or to Vandenberg on the West Coast for their launch. So we've got a major backlog there. As of this morning, there were 221 barges awaiting passage. Because that lock is so much smaller and can only handle one barge at a time, it's taken about 1.6 hours per barge to process. So you're looking at about a 10-day wait for a barge to access the lock. And then instead of a 2-hour process to process a 15-barge tow, it's turning into 20 to 24 hours to process a 15-barge tow and its towboat. So
yeah,
it's
so
getting worse.
a lot to process there. So just for clarity, first of all, we're fortunate that this lock happens to have an auxiliary lock, because not all of them do. So the good news is traffic is still moving. The bad news is the auxiliary lock is so much older and smaller. So you've mentioned that one barge fits into the auxiliary lock at a time. How many would fit in the main lock if that were operational?
The main lock is 110 feet by 600 feet long. Your standard average jumbo hopper barge is 195 by 35. So that means we could get 3 wide and 3 long into that main chamber. So 9 barges at a time. A standard 15-barge tow that pushes up and down the river would push those first 9 barges into the lock. They would break the tow apart. The towboat and the 6 remaining barges would pull away. They would lock the boat, let's say going upstream. They would raise the level of the lock. There's a tow haulage unit inside the lock, which is a cable with a pulley system that they would open the gates on the upper end, and the cables would pulley the 9 barges out along what we used to have a guide wall, which we don't have now, where another boat would take those and hold them until the power and the remaining 6 barges could come up. So a 2.5-hour process for a 15 barge tow.
And that's now turned into about a 24-hour process, as you said. So substantial issue. At the time of the rendezvous, the delay was about a week. And I know we've talked about this on our podcast before, but recreational vessels are the lowest in the pecking order for priority on locking through these locks. So, the bottom line is, and we've talked about this when there were other lock closures, the lock operators don't want pleasure craft stuck out there for hours and days at a time. So the operators there at Wilson were extremely helpful in locking through, one lockage of pleasure craft a day, sometimes one every, 3, 4, 5 hours when they could. And everyone was able to get to the rendezvous. Everyone who left the rendezvous headed back downriver was able to get out. And that is simply because the lock operators were being kind and generous to us. So we're appreciative of that. And I want to talk more, Cline, about the organizations that you represent and how you're involved in this whole thing. But first of all, before we do that, we've talked about the issues at Wilson, but they're not all that unusual. Are they? We do see other lock issues. Demopolis had a big issue. How unusual is this kind of an issue happening at Wilson?
Well, to give you an overview, there are 237 lock chambers on the United States inland waterways, 80% of which are beyond their design life of 50 years. On the Tennessee River, the average age of a navigation lock is 75 years. Once again, the design life, as you mentioned earlier, is 50 years. So as luck would have it, everything was built new to your era. All of these things are worn out. The Corps of Engineers does a great job maintaining Band-Aids, baling wire, and duct tape. They're doing a great job, but they're all breaking down and wearing out at the same time. You mentioned Demopolis. In January of this year, the lock operator early one morning heard a boom and a lot of noise, and he went out to find that the upper miter seal on the gates had failed, and water was rushing into the lock uncontrollably. So TVA sent a boat down to get the closure in place to stop that flow so they could get in there and evaluate. We were without Demopolis for 4 months. Once they got it back open, less than a month later, in late June, early July, there was a failure at Holt Lock and Dam, where huge cracks in the lock monolith was making the gate stability an issue. So they chose to close it. There was not a lot of recreational craft on the Black Warrior Tom Bigby system that far north, but Alabama export coal, metallurgical coal for steel around the world was impacted in that they couldn't get that coal out of there. Yeah. So there was another 4 months, and there's issues like this. When we were together at Wilson last week, we had a failure on the Cumberland River of a hydraulic system at the Cheatham Lock and Dam, which gives access to the city of Nashville. Fortunately enough, Band-Aids, duct tape, baling wire, they were able to patch that back together until we can get a permanent fix in place there. And we're seeing this all over. The heavy fleet that we're waiting on to come do the repairs at Wilson are right now doing repairs at Smithland Lock and Dam on the Ohio River. So everything's getting old. Everything's requiring more maintenance, and it's what I came to you guys about with the Wilson thing, was to be patient.
Yep.
Our guys were trying to be patient, and of course, like you said, the lock operators were trying to manage a very, very difficult situation. And we wanted you guys, the message we want from you guys know that we're there. We're trying to be patient. We're all in this together. We all have to be patient in that situation.
Absolutely. And just to put a little bit of context around those other issues that Cline mentioned, the one that is on the main part of the Great Loop route and not a side trip is the Demopolis Lock and Dam. The failure at Demopolis was 4 months, and had it been a different 4 months, it would have put a stop to most people's progress on the loop if it had happened around this time of year. Right. It wasn't. We did have some loopers affected, but for the majority of the people on the loop, the 4 months that it was closed wasn't a huge issue. But I want to remind everybody we had a 4-month closure on the Illinois waterway that was planned maintenance last year. And when all was said and done, we had over 300 looper boats waiting for that maintenance to be over. And because it was in the Chicago area, there was a place to wait for 300 boats. When it happens in one of these other areas, first of all, a scheduled closure is not ideal, but it's much more palatable than an unexpected emergency closure like we saw at Demopolis. So why is it, Cline, do you think that this critical infrastructure is not being maintained to avoid these kinds of problems?
Well, we are maintaining. It's just real quick, everything needs to be replaced. The Corps now will tell you, and from my personal experience, we have 2 lock replacement, well, 1 addition and 1 replacement project going on the Tennessee River. The Chickamauga lock replacement in Chattanooga has been ongoing since I've been in this business, and I've been here since 2007. So we're 15 years in. We're looking at 17 years in. We're looking at another 2 years before that lock will be completed. We thought it was going to be about a $400 million project. Has turned out to be a $1 billion project. At the other end of the system, the lowermost lock and dam on the Tennessee River, the Kentucky lock and dam, they're building a new 1,200-foot lock to accommodate the influx of traffic. There's about 40 million tons there. The 600-foot lock, same size as Wilson, was not able to accommodate that volume. So we're building a new 1,200-foot lock there, which you will see up on the Ohio quite a bit. Once again, when I started, this lock was under construction, and we're looking at maybe 2030 to get that complete at a cost today of $1.5 billion. So a 600-foot lock now is going to take you, best case scenario, a decade and $1 billion. A 1,200-foot lock, best case scenario, is going to take you 15 years and $1.5 billion. So that's the thing. We've got, I guess probably Lower Monongahela is wrapping up, and probably Montgomery and Lock 25 are about to come on the schedule. The towing companies, the folks that I work for, pay a 27 cents per gallon tax into the Inland Waterways Trust Fund, which is like the Highway Trust Fund. It's matched by the federal government, and that goes for construction. So there's about $400 million roughly annual per year in the construction account. So that limits your ability to build locks very fast. But we are lobbying. We do every year beg for increases in operations and maintenance because everything is aging. It just costs more to maintain, and that's the big issue is dollars.
Right.
That's the big issue.
You mentioned that you represent the commercial interests, some of the tow companies. Tell us about the two organizations that you are here representing.
Well, the Tennessee River Valley Association was formed in 1967 as kind of a broad multi-state chamber of commerce, promote the use of the river system for water supply, recreation, and so on. We formed the Tennessee-Cumberland Waterways Council in the early 80s to kind of specifically look at, to home in on the users, primarily the towing companies that provide benefits, that get the goods to port and terminal operators on the Cumberland and the Tennessee River. About 160 port and terminals, roughly 160 plus port and terminals on the Tennessee and Cumberland system that move about 50 to 60 million tons of freight annually. That it could be sand for cement, it could be asphalt for roads, it could be grain and farm products for feed mills, chemicals indicator, and a huge volume of petroleum products into the Nashville area now, supporting their growing needs for fuel. Mm-hmm. But our users are diverse, not just towing companies, port and terminal operators, municipalities, engineering companies, anyone who has an interest in the health of the economy of this valley and its relationship to the two river systems.
So, and when we were chatting last week, you kind of gave me a number of what it costs your people to wait at the lock, and it is astounding. So go ahead and, if you can, share some of those numbers.
Well, the bad part is the towing company, a boat operating on the rivers will cost somewhere between $400 and $500 per hour to operate. Crude, fuel, provisioning, $400 to $500 per hour. So you can imagine if they're sitting for a week, 10 days now, at Wilson trying to get through, those costs are not absorbed by the towing companies. They pass those costs along to their shippers, and in the end, those costs go into the economy. So it's a hammer to the economy at $400 to $500 an hour. Not to mention the delays. We've had in the last week or so, we've had a business below Wilson who was waiting on empties to load farm products onto to get to their markets, was waiting on empties that were above Wilson to come down, and were facing having to shut down, send their folks home until they could get an empty barge there to put those farm products in, which created a backup. You got farmers trying to bring the harvest in. Now there's no room in the silos at the terminals. So this is a wicked ripples through the economy, cascading situation.
Yeah, and I do want to talk a little bit more about that ripple effect. Let's take a quick break and play a message from one of our sponsors. When we come back, we'll pick up where we left off, talk a little bit more about the ripple effect, and talk about how recreational boaters like loopers might be able to help with this situation. So we'll be back in a moment. Pebble Isle Marina is the perfect stop for AGLCA members to enjoy docktails, conveniently located in a sheltered harbor on the Tennessee River at mile marker 96. The marina's 600 plus feet of transient dockage offers slips convenient to all amenities and can accommodate boats of all styles and sizes up to 100 feet in length. Our fuel dock offers ethanol-free gas and high-speed diesel pumps with a ship store for supplies. Our floating seasonal restaurant offers beautiful views of Kentucky Lake from the patio. Check out the Pebble Isle website for details of special offers for AGLCA members.
How unique is the new Portofino restaurant and events in Utica? Let's start with Utica's only waterfront dining. Inside has been beautifully remodeled into a 2-level dining experience. Choose upstairs for an open, airy, and inviting atmosphere with a beautiful view of the waterfront. For a quiet, intimate dinner, the downstairs ambience makes it the perfect dining spot. Both levels with the same great food, an exquisite menu prepared by our own executive chef. Reserve your dinner experience at portofinoutica.com.
We're back on the Great Loop Radio podcast. Today we are talking about the aging infrastructure on our rivers, the system of locks that make these rivers navigable. And of course that matters to great loopers, but it actually matters way beyond great loopers in a way that we really should care about. Our guest today is Cline Jones. He is the executive director of the Tennessee River Valley Association and the Tennessee-Cumberland Waterways Council. Cline, you were just mentioning that it's about $400 to $500 an hour for these tows to operate. Some quick math, you said the wait was about 10 days. My quick math, it's about $125,000 spent sitting there waiting on the Wilson Lock at this point. We were just starting to talk about, some of the ripple effect, shippers waiting for empty barges, the barges that are full needing to get where they're going. You had also mentioned that one of the rockets, I believe, that is shipped from the Decatur area by water can't fit in the auxiliary lock at Wilson. Tell us a little bit more about that, the jobs at stake, the economic problems that are going to come from these kinds of delays.
Well, to touch on ULA, we have and I don't think it's a secret, they have a national security launch planned in early 2025. That common booster core is being assembled now at ULA in Decatur and is scheduled to pass through Wilson in mid-December. Well, it's not going to be ready in mid-December. So there's a great deal of effort trying to get that through there. So it's not just dollars and cents. It's our national security. This is how we get our national security satellites, weather satellites. I tell everybody, if you made a long distance cell phone call today, or if you got a weather report today, it was because of Wilson Lock, because those rockets that carry those satellites into orbit have to transit Wilson Lock. Currently, ULA moves about 8 rockets out per year. They're expecting that number to go up in the future. In fact, they're building a second ship the size of the rocket ship that's specially designed to carry those rocket components. The ripple effects through the economy. I'll just give you one here. We've got a sand producer that's been hit twice this year because the sand that they were dredging came from Jackson, Alabama, which was below Demopolis. So for 4 months, they couldn't get sand through Demopolis and had to reroute, and the cost went into the costs up here. Had to find sand sources extra. Well, just as soon as we get back opening, get sand moving, we have this issue at Wilson. They move about 1 million tons a year through Florence, Decatur, and Huntsville. Well, now their backstock and supplies are coming down. They're going to run out of sand.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that the cement producers are going to have to either rail sand in, which is going to be a great deal more expensive, or truck sand in, which would be phenomenally expensive. And those costs, once again, will be passed along into the economy. I don't know how a road building exercise that they're working now is going to absorb those costs. I mean, it's going to be phenomenal.
Yeah. So for those of you doing the loop or planning to do the loop, you can see where these issues could create some obstacles for you and some roadblocks. The best thing we can urge is patience. And just imagine the patience for these commercial tow operators where their cost is $400 to $500 an hour to wait when they're watching a group of recreational vessels being locked through. It's, it's a challenge. And we need to remember to be thankful anytime we're put in front of any of these commercial vessels, because that does not have to happen. And we certainly are thankful for the lock operators and the commercial, the tow operators are generally extremely courteous and don't want to see the recreational boaters, some of whom have less experience, most of whom have way less experience than a commercial barge operator, to be in a trouble spot in the river. So just keep all this in mind, keep your patience as you're waiting, because this issue doesn't end here with Wilson. So hopefully we've opened your eyes a little bit today to how it affects the Great Loop, but even more importantly, how it affects our greater economy when these types of issues happen. So hopefully now you're caring about these locks, perhaps a little bit more than you did before. But Cline, as recreational boaters, what can we do to help with this situation?
Well, everybody has a congressman, everybody has a senator, and we've said before that the issue is dollars. So, if you can reach out to those folks and tell them how important it is to you, not just to you, but to the economy. Let me touch on something else. You're talking about sharing the river with the towboaters.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an incident, if there's an accident, if you're in distress and there's a towboat nearby, you can count on that towboat jumping into action pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
These guys are trained. They're trained to do rescue operations. The average deckhand they're ready. They can launch a boat and be with you pretty quick. And I can point to numbers of instances where that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing is there's a Water Resource Development Act and once again is waiting action in Congress. I don't know if y'all know that Congress is not real busy right now, but this is something that needs to be done. There is a waterways provisions in there, not just for Wilson Lock, but for the system, to get more money into the system, to revise the way the taxes are collected and how they're collected and how the money is spent. So reach out to your congressman or your senator. Let them know how important it is to you, not just to you as recreational boaters, but to the towing community, the importance of the river systems to the overall economy. If you think about the great cities of the world, they're all built on a river system. Why? Because that's the most energy efficient form of bulk transportation. If you live in an area where you have a congressman who might be of the Democrat persuasion and concerned about the environment, there's no greener way to move bulk freight than by barge. There's just no greener way. It's just the lowest emissions, most energy efficient way to move freight. One other way you can help is right now, because we have these issues moving around in Congress. In addition to calling your individual congressman, if you have a smartphone, I would ask that you text LOCKS, LOCKS, to 202-979-0993. That's text the word LOCKS, LOCKS, to 202-979-0993. And that will help us. There's strength in numbers. Our folks from the towing companies, the port and terminal operators, the engineering firms, individuals interested are all doing this. It would be a great help. The more volume we make get those cell phones to ring and get those offices to ring and hear about the importance of the river system would all be.
Yeah. And texting locks to that number you gave us, Cline, what does that do? Who is that notifying?
It goes to Congress and it's distributed to every member
Mm-hmm.
in the House and Senate side that locks are important. There's a message. The Waterways Council is the lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. that we have a close relationship with. They have someone on the Hill They have they're there full time, and they have an explanation of this when this office sees this word locks. They know what it's referring to. In fact, there's probably some more information there for those guys to receive when they get that. But
Excellent.
it's just to let everyone in Congress, committee heads, everyone know the importance.
Yeah. So it sounds like the first step towards really kind of alleviating some of this pressure on the system is money.
Of course.
So, and it also sounds like it's a lot of money based on what you were discussing with the time and the cost to replace a lock. But with so much of the locking system beyond its designed lifespan, I think we have to expect many of them to need to be replaced. Any idea at this point how long the backlog is? You know, how much time will it take to get the system back up to where it's operating efficiently and we don't have to worry about these types of outages? Never, right?
Not a lot of time. Well, as you can imagine, with Wilson being 65 years old and the auxiliary relying on now 100, we are encouraging, and this is a very difficult process to get going, we're encouraging a study to look at replacing that lock there, which would be a very interesting task. Currently, there are, I believe, 14 projects in line. Best we can probably do with the $400 million that's in the pipeline now per year would be, and that's subject to an annual appropriation. It's not like building a battleship. You don't give them the money and to the contractor and say, build it. It's subject to annual appropriations by Congress. So that $400 million can build about 3 to 4 maybe per year. You can afford the work. There's only a limited amount of work you can do in that small footprint, but that'll provide for construction about 3 to 4, maybe to do some studies for a fifth. So you can imagine if we got in line today at Wilson, if we were authorized in this WRDA and we were looking for appropriations, we would be number 14 or 15 in line, 4 per year at a decade minimum each. It would not be in my lifetime and it would not be in your lifetime.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the current plan at Wilson is replacement of some of those parts because it doesn't look like repair is possible. So correct me if I'm wrong on that, but if we are looking at replacement on the parts, when do we expect that main chamber to be operational again?
Well, we had a bad day yesterday. We have a regular standing call with the Corps and TVA, and they have informed us that they believe the pintle will have to be replaced, which is the ball that the lock sits on. That means the lock will have to be, the gates, those 1.3 million pound each gates will have to be jacked up. The old pintle will have to be removed, will have to be cast, formed, constructed, do the engineer, have to be design engineering built, brought back and replaced. They're telling us that we're probably going to get in there November 10th or 11th to dewater and get eyes on the gate, hands on the gate, a 3-week evaluation. They should have an answer for us on December of the path forward. But right now it looks like the path forward will be to hopefully be able to operate that gate to move the national security rocket that we've got to get out. Maybe to alleviate the tow. I don't think the queue there. I don't believe. I'm not hopeful that the queue will be alleviated, but maybe be able to get some movement in the gates. They'll come back later in December, actually later in January, to do the permanent repairs. We'll have the new pintle, and hopefully the gates will not require major pieces to be reconstructed, but we'll be down until April the 20th. So you thought Demopolis was a long 4 months. We're looking at 6 months from now. We've already been down a month. So this will be a 7-month closure at Wilson. And as you said earlier, we're very fortunate. And one of the reasons the Tennessee Valley has been so successful in recruiting and bringing industry in is because we've had that redundancy of that auxiliary lock. There's auxiliary locks at Pickwick, Wilson, Wheeler, and Gunnersville. At Kentucky, the auxiliary is physically a couple of miles away over on the Cumberland at Barkley Lock and Dam, and they can access through the canal there, through the land between the lakes. So we're fortunate that we have that auxiliary here. A lot of places in the country, if you're waiting 7 months, you'd lose businesses, you'd lose traffic off the river that may not come back. It's it's going to be a long 6 months from now, I can assure you.
Yes, and for the commercial interest, for the economic impact, that is going to be a very long 6 months. The good news, I guess, for loopers to look at it is by next season, it's usually fall when loopers are cruising the Tennessee River. So by next season, hopefully we could see a more normal passage through the Wilson Lock instead of what we're seeing today.
Well,
Any last thoughts, Cline?
recreational boaters are going to take a hit. There's an
Mhm.
average of about 20,000 recreational lockages, 20,000 recreational boaters locked through, sometimes multiples of boats in the chambers
Mhm.
locked through. So, your bass fishermen, the local people like me who've
Mhm.
enjoyed Pickwick, Wilson, and Wheeler Lakes, folks that transit outside of out of the loop, like you said, that want to go up to the beautiful parts of the river system, up to Knoxville and Little River, are going to be impacted.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
because they're not organized in a group that I went and said, Corps engineers, here comes 40
Mhm.
boats.
And
Y'all
we
need to be
appreciate that for sure.
we need to be thinking about what we're going to do, because here comes 40 folks,
Mhm.
and they're going to have to get in and out. It's going to be difficult. The bass fishermen, people that catch catfish, the local guys like me that just like to lock through and,
Yeah.
and move around on the system are going to be impacted.
Yeah, absolutely. Cline, thank you for being with us today and sharing these details. Hopefully, we've kind of opened some eyes about how these rivers are used commercially and the importance of them. And again, would you give us that number one more time to text the word locks to?
Text the word locks, LOCKS, to area code 202-979-0993. And I would invite anyone, we have a website, trva-tcwc.com, that has a lot of good information on there. I am not great at it, but I am on social media, Facebook, and I try to keep our Facebook page updated. In fact, the information that we gleaned yesterday from our meeting, I do key outtakes, key takeaways, and those are posted there. Slides that the Corps provides us on information. I try to get as much information out there as we possibly can, because we all need information.
Excellent. We will look at those resources, and please keep us up to date on progress at Wilson. We appreciate you sharing all these details today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Kim. Thank you very much.
Yes. And thanks to everyone who's watched or listened today. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Great Loop Radio podcast. Until then, safe cruising.